we have the unique opportunity of hearing from a Canadian lighting designer specializing in dance. With a background as a stage manager for various dance companies, Pierre immersed himself in the world of movement and rhythm. He combined a deep understanding of the art of dance with his technical expertise, allowing him to create lighting designs that seamlessly complement and accentuate the vision of choreographers and directors, much like client work with landscape architecture. Pierre's expertise extends beyond traditional stage performances. He has lent his creative vision to museum and site-specific productions, skillfully integrating lighting into unconventional spaces. This ability to adapt his craft to different environments showcases his creative expertise. Pierre Lavoie's work has received critical acclaim, with the Globe and Mail recognizing him as one of Canada's greatest lighting masters, and the New York Times describing his work as superbly lighted. A master of using light to sculpt space, evoke emotion, and emphasize the dynamics of dance, Pierre is known for his ability to seamlessly weave together color, intensity, and movement. Please welcome Pierre Lavoie.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. First, I would like to thank Deandra, Addison, and my sister Caroline for the invitation and making this all possible for me. Today, I want to talk about the transformative power of lighting, how it helps see the space in a different way, and how we look at objects and people, and how it's highly influenced by lighting. This is a photograph of the Banff Centre School of Fine Arts in Alberta. And the reason why I chose this photograph is this was the turning point in my career, is I have a kind of a strange alternative journey into my studies. I started in math and science, and then I went to literature, and then I went to linguistics and semiotics. And then I left all that, and I went to broadcasting, radio, and television. So it's all over the map. And in radio and televisions, I was a radio journalist and a film editor for the air traffic control for the government of Canada. And I got bored, and I took my pension plan, because in the government you get a good pension plan. And I traveled across the country from Montreal to Banff in the Rockies by train, because I wanted to sense the space, the whole sense of that width of the country. At the Banff Centre, I applied to the wrong program. I wanted to be a theater director, because when I was bored with my job, all I did was going to see shows. And in Ottawa, I had the opportunity to see theater, dance, film, everything. And instead of applying to the theatercraft program, I applied to the stagecraft program. At the time, I didn't speak any English, so this is why I made that mistake. But there I discovered stage management, and I discovered dance. And out of that, I got a job in Toronto as a stage manager. This is like my background. Where it all started, though, is that in the 70s, when I was a teenager, like 12 years old, my dad had a huge backyard, like 100 feet deep, 60 feet wide, and he loved planting trees. And we had like hundreds of trees and different species, and it started, so people would start coming, and he had flower beds too, and all the color arrangements and when they would bloom, and all of that was thought of between my dad and my mom. And at some point we had people coming to see the backyard. They just wanted to visit. So my job was to escort them and explain to them what it was about and everything. And he wanted to expand that pleasure to evening visits. So he decided, let's put lights. And all those little color dots that you see there are just basically light bulbs and color dots. And that's how it all started. So in a way, this were the seeds of our our interest started. I didn't know at the time I wanted to be a lighting designer or I would be making a living out of it. And for my sister, it geared her, I think, towards landscape architecture. I don't think she knew at the time either. So sometimes like seeds are planted and we move away from it and then it grows and then suddenly it reappears. Today I want to talk about 3 projects about lighting design. And the 3 projects I chose are totally different and they deal with especially different experience from the viewer point of view and different experience in terms of the collaborative processes that we had between the creative team. The first one, it will be in a theater environment, a dance piece. The second one will be an opera, but in a site-specific environment. And the third one is a museum, which was an immersive kind of environment. The traditional one is in a proscenium theater. This is why I call it traditional. This is basically set in a black box where you have what we call the fourth wall. Basically what you're looking at is through the frame, a window frame, a large window frame. So the relationship viewer and the actual theatrical performance has kind of a voyeur kind of feeling. The second one, the opera, I chose a site-specific environment. So basically, it's in a warehouse where the viewer, the space itself becomes the set. So it's just an addition of certain elements, and I'll get deeper into this when we get there. And the third one is the ambulatory exhibition, which means that the viewer is actually is integrated within the artwork. And it's got a different engagement between the user and the actual work that they're exploring. Because what happens is that they are aware of the other viewers. When you're in a theater, the lights go dark, so you totally forget about your neighbor. And here, you watch the reaction of each of the viewers. So it's a very interesting, different approach that you have to keep in mind. None of this is maybe directly related to landscape or to urban design, but you'll see by the end how everything relates. Everything is interconnected. And pay attention to this actual landscape, and at the end I'll show you how powerful lighting can be to transform this space. Before I go into those 3 projects, I just want to talk a bit about the lighting design process. How do we approach work? And what are the tools that are given to us? And the approach I want to take, first of all, is the type of sources we have. I'd like to ask you, like, what do you, can you tell me what light type sources? Just if you look up, how is this room lit? What kind of sources is it?
LED.
There's LEDs. There's also fluorescent tubes. There's no windows here, but if you look outside the window, what kind of light is there? Sunlight, and that sunlight can vary. It can become cloudy. If it's at night, moonlight, starlight. So, and then you start thinking there's candle lights. We talked about the LEDs, the fluorescents. There's also art sources like the street post that you see. What kind of light does it emit? Is that a cold white? Is that like an amberish sodium vapor light? So those are all light sources that you can use in a design, and especially for the outdoors and landscape design, and how it influences the way we look at things and the way we perceive things. Those are like the type sources that a lighting designer can choose. But there's also lighting choices. I won't mention them all because there's too many and it would take too much time. But we have what we call colors. And colors can be expressed with filters. And in the old tungsten filament lights that we still use most of the time in the theater, This is like just an example of how much choices of filters and colors you can have. And all of these will treat that light that you have differently and will give you a different perception. This morning at one of the studio, we tried it with the LEDs, because also the LEDs offers you even more choices of colors. But it's a different kind of quality of color that we have to think. Because when you fade the light with a filter, you have what we call the red shift. In LEDs, you don't have that red shift, meaning that as I fade this pink light, it's going to get warmer the lower I get. But LEDs, if you choose the same pink, as you go lower, that pink will remain true to the pink that you chose. So it's a big adaptation to do. So that's one type of choice I have, the color. I have angles. In this photo, you can see two angles. There's the backlight. If you look at the three shafts of light, casting on the center character, which is Elton John on this ballet, you just see him outlined. So that's a way to bring out the performers away from against a black background, contre-jour, backlight. But I wanted to see the dancers without changing the quality of the central figure of this section. So I use low side lights. And low side lights in dance is very used because it makes the dancers look taller, it makes them float in the air, so you don't see the floor at all. So those are different angles, and there's many other angles, but it's just to show you an example of how angles of light will change the perception of the space, will create depth, and will create also focal point. Another very important tool I use is contrast. And I know that you use that term a lot in your classes. Contrast helps you define the space. It creates an architecture in the space. You see zones of dark and light, and it gives it life. So that's another tool I use in lighting. Layers. In this production, this was a Frankenstein ballet, you have a layer at the front, which is a kind of a projection screen where we projected snowflakes. And video projectors is a light source, by the way. It's a light, and what it adds to it, it's motion. So there's that extra addition of that nowadays is really used in video mapping, for instance, which is like projections on buildings or on the outdoor environment. But the first layer is the snowflake. The second layer behind those snowflakes are the performers. Again, they're lit from sides to pull them out from the background without affecting the texturing of the background that I'll use. Then you have the cabin in the middle, and inside you have daylight, like the light that they use inside. And then behind that, you have the projection of the mountain and another layer of snowflakes. And then between that, you have the shafts that you see at the top of a texturing on the floor so that the floor reappears without affecting any of those layers. So all of that is part of the design process, all those tools that I use in lighting theatrical performance. Another element that I want to talk about is duration. Timing, all the light progress over time. In this situation, there's a scene change, and the set comes in and transforms the space. And it's transformed with video projection and lighting. And suddenly, like, you have the sun rays coming through the space. And then the dancers reappear, and that space becomes alive, where it goes from a dark stage, it comes to that settings. Another very important element that you do with lighting is storytelling. And I talk a lot about storytelling. When I create lighting, I have to make, every choices I have has a motivation. In this, it's like, it tells a story. It tells a story not only by the composition of the performers, but again, I use layer. This dancer here is in front of a scrim, which is a see-through fabric. And the see-through fabric is in front of the set. And that set will disappear if it's not lit. So there's that layer at the back. And at the back is the theater performance. The show was Dangerous Liaison. And at the front, it's the dancing part of the character. So there was a narration happening. But like, I treated the space to give it really, like, I played with the 3D. So with angles, you see like the shadow lines. You see also like what I call stains of light. I just put like a splash of light on the wall, and it just like gives you an idea that something else is happening behind there. So it tells story by the way you construct the lighting, and it's very important. I know that I talked a lot about that in one of the studio about storytelling. You make a story in what you want to do, and you just go with it and push it forward. When we talk about design process, there's limitation or constraints. One of them that you're familiar with is deadline. You have to deal with in lighting is inventory, like what is available for me in that project? What is the budget? What are the physical limitations when I deal with a theater piece and all of that? So those are the constraints. Yeah. Whoops. Come on. It's asleep. Oh, no, it took duration. Storytelling, constraint. It doesn't want to go. Oh, and then it skipped. Okay. Little glitch here. It just skips. Okay. It's very slow. The next slide will just deal with, it appears, the dance project. What you have here is a ground plan of a stage, and it's in Montreal. It's Les Grands Ballets Canadiens. It was an abstract ballet, about 35 minutes. And basically, it's a black box. What you see is all the lights, the symbol of the lights that were used in the full show. And the black box, the floor is black, those are black curtains. So everything is black except this piece of scenery. And this is a 28-foot tall wall that is 16 feet wide with protruding pegs that are about 8 or 9 inches deep. And also one thing that I'd like you to notice is that this is the center line here. That wall is off center. So there's two things that is expressed with that for me, is like the size of the wall is very imposing and it's very crushing, and the fact that it's off-centered creates kind of an imbalance and gives you a sense of direction. This, I just wanted to show you this one because it shows you the scale. Scale is important. You have the size of the dancer at the bottom, and this is how tall this wall is. And this is how wide it is. It's a contemporary ballet. It's not a story ballet. It's not like Cinderella or Nutcracker or whatever. So it's an abstract story. So a storyline can go, you can make your own story. It's a different world for me. It's like that wall is not a normal wall. So it tells you that we're not in a normal place. Those costumes are not past costumes. They could be future costumes, or those could be alien people. So you know that already that that context is set up. And we have a large stage. We talk 52 feet wide by 36 feet deep. So there's a lot of movement in that space. So it involves me to create a large statement, bold statement. The wall was the starting point of this design because it was imposing. And what I wanted to play with was the importance of shadows. And that wall is so big that it had to create the shadows. And for me, it was like positive and negative space. But to accomplish this, I needed to do some tests. And luckily, the ballet in Montreal has its own theater space to do these. So we worked on putting one section of the wall. It is not the full wall, but I just wanted to make sure that what I had in mind would work. And literally, it didn't work at the beginning. Because in my head, I thought if I put a fixture right in the middle at the back and just project on it, I'll see the shadow. But I didn't have the distance. And the shadow ended up being so more like over here and very soft. This set has hard lines. I want hard lines on the shadows. So what I did is I added one more light, and then I started to spread the lights apart until I reached that effect. And then that solution worked, and that's why I went to weight with it. But the reason why I use this is because it's a crushing effect as well. So shadows was important. Another play on shadows, that wall has those protruding pegs. So they suggested, for me, I saw that and I talked with the choreographer and I said, I really want to play with the shadows of those pegs. Now, I said, and I want those shadows to move. Motion. Again, it's very important in my design process. So I said, there's two possibilities of direction. It either goes up or it comes down. If it goes up, it tells a different story. It's lighten the mood. If it goes down, it crushes. And to me, that wall is so imposing. So we decided that we would go with the downward motion. And what happens with the downward motions, there's two possibilities. In this one, I just did a straight coming down with the light. And what happens is that there's a confusion that occurs with the shadow. Some of the shadows go down, and some of the shadows go up. And so it's an unnatural transfer of shadows. And so that adds to that abstract feel in that particular piece. Here's an example of angles, different angles. I use a strong shaft, but sidewise, and it casted some more shadows. And then the performer was lit from the front, flattening her against that wall. And I was really happy with the photographer there because he really got the composition I was trying to achieve. And because it's right there. So angles, again, helps you to create visual composition with lights. Another important one is shapes, architecture, abstract. These are irregular, rectangular shapes with sharp line because of the set. And also a strong diagonal push, so it's got energy. And it also matches the arrangement, the alignment of the performers, because they go in the same direction. It's like pushing them in that way. And then you can play with the opposite direction and look at how it matches again the way the choreography was created. This was not discussed between the choreographer and I. It's just, once you understand the architecture of the movement of the piece, it comes naturally. You have no choice but to do this, you know? And I think it's the same with landscape. You get constraints that forces you to create something that works with that space. Another aspect in that ballet, when I use the strong shadows, is what I call negative space. And in this one, I use a reversal effect as well. So basically, you have a little bit here, like the shadows from the back, but I filled in that shadow with a color. And for that color, for me to have a motivation, I lit the wall the same color. So it's as if that color emanates from the wall. So it creates a second world. And what happens is you'll see that color will transfer to the side and the wall will change color. And that negative space will reappear, but the dancers will still be seen. So that's what I call the reversal. And you see the center will disappear, dark, but then the color is on the side. And then I complete it with again, angle, it uses negative space, and it uses color. I use a lot the negative space. Here is an example of negative circle, where you have a circle, dark light in the middle with glowing performers, and then I fill in the space. And then I create concentric circle. The concentric circle that brings the people in the group as the choreography brings them in the group. It also brings a kind of a mirroring of that full moon there. So all of those are part of the tools that you have to create a story. When I was talking about storyline, these are my own stories. They don't go at all with the ballet, but they make sense with the ballet in a way. So the key ideas here is that basically I could have lit this whole ballet without shadows because it was possible. But to me, so that wall wasn't an imposition, but it was a suggestion. And from those suggestions of shadows, I created my own story, how important and how it helps me make sense of the choices I create. Also, it's a full cast of dancers, so I had to use bold strokes, a lot of movement. That's why I had like those large rectangular shapes that filled up the stage, but that still created a world. Because if you filled the whole stage the same, so with those rectangle, you had areas that were grayer than others because the lights were piling on top of the other. So basically the lighting here transformed the black box. And that's where, again, why I talk about the transformative power of lighting. It has that power. Second project, I will take a sip of water, is the opera. And the opera here is, I'll tell you a bit about the context. It's an opera that was set in the exploratory time of the North Pole. So it's called Facing South. And it's basically at the turn of the 19th century, 1895, 1900, there was a fascination for the North Pole exploration. So the main character is Admiral Peary, who on his third trip to the North Pole brought back 3 generations of an Inuit family and put them in a museum in New York, the American Natural Museum History in Manhattan. That's the story. So that's the main thing. The challenges, you have one single space, 3 locations. You had the North Pole. So for the North Pole, the set designer chose specifically that warehouse. And all she did was to dress that warehouse with rocks that she went to a quarry. And she chose a particular rocks. Tarps that represents icebergs, snowbanks, could be anything that relates because of that color and that crispiness of those tarp. She had also, so that cold starkness of the space, you know, it's like unfinished. It's like raw. It somehow like evokes the landscape that we're trying to deal with over there. The second location is the home. And what the set designer did here, a choice was one single element, a sofa, but a red sofa. That's the only color that we have in this ballet. Everything else is just tones. And so that warmth of the red just brings you the comfort also of the home. And the third location, of course, is the museum. And a museum that we just used the architecture of the space. We framed it within the pillars that were already, so it became the center point at that time. The lighting choice for this opera, when I'm proposed with the script and I'm proposed the set, the site, basically that warehouse, was basically the three locations. North Pole suggests cold. The home suggests warm. The museum suggests institutional, hospital, you know, like flat lighting. A lighting that is even, like in the museum, you just want accent certain things, but everything else is at the same level. So those were like the choices for color-wise, color temperature. But also I had angle choices. And the angle choices were limited by the set designer. She didn't want me to hang lights in front so that I could light the actual performers from the front, which is more flattering in a way and easier to control. She wanted to have them set between the pillars. And I have to agree with her, that was the best choice because it integrates it within the space without interrupting what the viewer is seeing. So there's that importance of like the viewer experience in the whole thing. I had also a low light in the corner. And a lot of the lights were coming from that side. So these were like my constraint and choice. I talked about shadow in the first piece. I'm going to talk about shadows later on. But here you have like, what I want to say is that in site-specific event, the actual site becomes the mean, like it's like in semiotics, a container means the content. So here, the content is North Pole, harshness, ruggedness, coldness, and this space was cold, was rugged. So it becomes, the space is the set and is the content as well. We embedded the fluorescent pole onto those poles. So when they weren't lit, you kind of lose them because the poles were white. And so unlit fluorescent bulbs is white. This show was 20 years ago. LEDs was not part of our vocabulary. So to find fluorescents that you could dim, those came from Germany, from a leftover production that we bought because we needed them to dim. And in order to have them to dim, you had to run those fluorescents for 1,000 hours so that you could have the actual curve that you wanted. Those are just little details. I talked about shadows. This is an element of style of mine. I just love shadows. They express so much. In this particular example here, I wanted to have a single shadow. So a single shadow means it comes from a single light source. So I needed a light source that covered the whole space. But what happens with the single shadows is that it suggests to me the North Pole. It suggests to me the loneliness, the homesickness. This explorer had to travel months in order to get to the North Pole. This explorer lost a lot of a teammate to the elements. And so, and it's the distance, it's far. So long shadows to me expresses that feeling of loneliness and homesickness. So again, the shadow has a different meaning here than in the ballet before. Another thing that you can do with shadows is create foreground-background separation. Here, in the foreground, you have the performer singing his emotion, singing his feeling. And at the back, you have the evocative of the musician playing the violin, playing the melody of the song. And to separate those two worlds, you have that long shadow shaft. So again, you can create foreground, background with just a darkness in the middle. And again, that transforms the space with lights. You can also create that separation with colors and ambience. And here, like at the back, it's brighter, and you have the focus more on the display case, and at the front, and it's colder. And at the front, it's not as bright. It's a warmer color. So you have, again, that foreground, background created with the lighting. one major lessons I learned, because I came from the world of dance. This was my first opera, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to get bored because they never move. And they, I broke that idea as soon as I worked on that opera, because it gave me the chance to work on what I call close-up. I never get that chance in a dance because they're never in the same place. They keep moving, and it's fine. That's the medium. This medium is more like, so for this, I created with lighting, I just created that nest. You know, it's like a nest of warmth, and a small contained on their two faces. And it's just, and then the rest is the cold world. So it expresses a story as well that this, I mean, is she trying to warm him up and bring him back to civilization after his long trip to the North Pole? Or is he dying? We don't know, but there's that. Maybe he's already dead because of what he did. So there's all stories that you can make with just the way the lighting expresses it. But the importance for me there was the close-up and how you can create those with a certain accent of light. And this one is on the heads. The third space was the museum, and of course I used the fluorescence. One thing about fluorescent which is fascinating is that you have no shadows. So it's totally against my feelings. But for this situation it worked. And what I want to show you is how the set designer here, this is the actual museum of natural history in New York. See the resemblance there is with what we have there. It's like you have those window frames, the rhythm of the frames, the rhythm of the pillar, which you have here with the rhythm of the windows on that side there. And so it's like really, she's a brilliant set designer. One of the important things that when you think North Pole, you think Northern Lights. And that was the scariest challenge for me. Is how do I create Northern Lights in this environment? There's two things about Northern Lights is that the color. And I found a book on Northern Lights, and then with my gel book, I tried to find the different colors there. I found them. But then I realized it was too complicated to reproduce in such like a random pattern. The other thing with Northern Lights is that they move. So this is the result on the back wall. Luckily, that set designer, like that wall was white. So that gave me a projection surface. If the wall was black, it wouldn't work. And basically what I did is I used reflective material. At some point in one of the studios, I talk about reflective material. This one is kind of a mylar. And when you move it, you have like freckles of light, different colors. And what I did is I crumbled it in front of a light fixture, which you see right in the corner there. But then I couldn't stand there doing this during the opera. That wouldn't work. And I said, okay, so how can I create that motion? And basically I reproduced the same, I added a second light. And basically I just fluctuate those light, and then sometimes I made them like flicker. And it gives that flame animation on the wall. And that's how I created the Northern Lights. So here in this project, I basically had limitation with the space. So these were my choices were set by the site itself and by the script, because we had 3 locations. But also the smaller cast gave me the chance to focus on certain elements and stay there and really create a kind of a jewel box into where they are. Like I envelope them with lighting. The other thing that in a site-specific, there's a different relationship with the viewer because you don't have that frame anymore. So that opening was like 60 feet long. And so the audience or the user has to know where to look. So in this instance, the lighting just directs the focus of the viewer and the user to where you want them. And so the lighting has a different interaction with the audience there. What do I want the viewer to see at what time? How much I want him to see it. Oops, it skipped the slide. The third project is the museum. It's the Indigenous Peoples Experience Pavilion in Edmonton, Alberta. That's a recent museum. And what you have here is like the layout of a section of that pavilion. It's 29,000 square feet. So there's a lot of footage to cover in lights. And it just basically tells the history of the Indigenous and Métis people in that province. This is the completed view of the pavilion. And this represents a river, the winding river of the Saskatchewan River in the province. And if you see, like we're from the arrival, what they call the arrival room, and this is divided in 4 pods. And here the focal point is the large teepee in the winter pod. So you have a pod here that was the winter, and you have the fall here, and then you have the summer here, and you have the spring here. But you get an idea of like the progression and the thematic of that particular section. The challenges for this is that it was a construction site, even while we were doing the lighting. This happens during COVID, so that was created between 2018 and 2021. So we were right in the heart of it. And actually, the only reason why I was able to work during that time was because it was a construction site. So they weren't stopped. But all the entertainment business, like none of my colleagues were working. So it was, but it was a new challenge for me. I've never been into a construction site. It was also an inherited lighting plan, which means that this project, the whole building and the whole concept had been, was done by a company, Stantec Design, and they're based in California, and they do all the theme park, whether it's Disney in Hong Kong or Disney in Paris or whatever. And they have like subsidiaries all over the world. But what happens is that the owner, the client, took away the mandate of the content because it was not, it didn't work with what they wanted. And they had companies, other companies apply. And the company that won the content to develop the lighting, the sound, all the storyboards and everything was a company from Calgary. And they asked me to consult and then do the lighting design. So I had to take choices already made by someone else who would not talk to me, literally. And I had to make sense of the choices and then realize that most of the choices didn't work anymore with the content that I was given. So it was a big challenge. We had also the COVID contest. It's like suddenly I had to wear protection equipment. This is the creative team here, like the director, the co-director, the production manager. And you had to wear the vest, the boots, the slippers, the mask, the visors, and they wanted me to wear gloves. And that's where I said, well, I can't really wear gloves when this was my lighting board here. It's like I need to create. And also visors and glasses and masks and the fogging, you can't see what you're doing. So this is a challenge. The elements to consider in an immersive thing, and this is closer to what you're experiencing when you design a theme park, for instance, or whatever, is that there's the deambulation, like people are walking through the space. In this particular one, there was a special floor design of the river embedded into the concrete. They invested like $100,000 just for that river. And the first day I did the test with the lighting that was provided to me, you couldn't see the river. And I said, that doesn't work. So I had to suddenly reassign lighting instruments for the river and find a color that will make that river come out. And so that was another element to consider. Information panels, it's a museum. there's like waypoints where you have to read and you have to get the information. Artifacts, which are like the objects that they put in the museum, like whether it's a canoe, a stuffed bird, depending on what museum you are in. The storytelling. Here the storytelling was told through video animation. There was 54 large screen in those 4 pods. And each screen had a video projectors. Each screens had like light colored projection from behind. So to me, for those projections, I had to choose special screen colors that wouldn't make the writing disappear, wouldn't make the video animation disappear. So you have here like the path where you see the river and you see what we call gobos. And gobos are done with little metal things that has shapes. And this one had like kind of a squiggly in it. And then and then they had another gobo in front and they were turning so that it gives the illusion of water. And so that the pathway, the river, you have obstacle. This is a big rock, and there's a lot of big rocks and canoe and things. So when we talk, I know you all talked about safety when you think about lighting. It's always the first thing that comes to mind when with the students I talked to yesterday and today. Yeah, safety, but you have to keep them lit, but not necessarily the same way that the rest is lit. Those projection screen, you see where those like little teepees are? So they were like about 20 feet tall. And the light sources, which are like the little squiggly dots at the top. And that's where they were. And you see there's a lot of obstacles. They were like the poles that I had to deal with. Those poles have speakers integrated. So it was an immersive, so there was vocal environment everywhere. And each pod had different. So at some point, the content was played only in one of the pods. So the projection content for this museum was, you had mini stories, 30 seconds video clip that were set in the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter. And those 30-second video clip would play at different time, and sometimes at the same time in one pod to the other. So how do you direct the attention for people to suddenly stop? Oh, there's an event happening. And so that event, what we found out is that sound leading, so with a kind of a change of sound and a lowering of the lights where the people are wandering, but keeping it safe, and focusing, drawing the attention to where that actual mini movies would happen. Then we had what we called a 5-minute that would cover the whole space. Wherever you were in the space, suddenly like there would be a 5-minute animation movie that would tell basically the creation story from the indigenous people. And so so you could follow the story, and it was interesting during when we did the flow test, which you're familiar with, is that suddenly you check, okay, how fast we're going through that. And then there were mini traveling moments. There was a color exploration process in this project, and that's all I did was basically I asked them to send me those fixtures that were lighting the movie screens. And I bought a white sheet, and I did color test. And this is my setup on my laundry room, the computer and all that, and I would turn around and play with it and find, and this is my preliminary color selection for seasons. So some of them represent spring, some of them represent summer, fall, and winter. And then you have like the white. So that was a basic color scheme that I selected. I just want to touch briefly the urban landscape, how it applies to that. You have here that photo that we had at the beginning, and I just want you to notice that, first of all, it's only color temperature. It's a cool white and a warm white. And not everything is lit. And so sometimes you don't have to light everything. And then this one gives you, brings you to look up and at the thing. Another one that I want to mention briefly is a lighting installation in the Botanical Garden in Montreal. This is a mirror ball. It's a like really simple, kitschy tool. And instead of being hung in the air, it's actually put in the underbush right here, and with a light fixture there. And what happens is that when I was talking about reflection, the reflections are happening under the leaves. And it gives you that magical sky that is suddenly under the leaves. That's another application. Here's is like a kind of a mobile application is in a street in Rennes in France. And it is basically to play with shadows. Like when it's sunny, you have the shadows of the birds and the ribbons. And also it has a double purpose because that street was extremely hot in hot days. So it provides suddenly like a kind of a cooling down of that street. And then this is in the overcast thing. And the last, but not least, is that one thing that I admire in the landscape architecture and urban design is that in Europe, they really create the lighting for the lighting instruments for the purpose that they want. This one pose serves three purposes. This fixture is for the street, for the cars. This fixture at the top, you have like that C shape with broken mirrors. That's for the pedestrian way. And the front has little rectangular slats. That's for the facade of the building. Look at the result. It's really, to me, it's a theatrical inspiration for street design. You see the pedestrian with the gobo-like, it reminds me a bit of the river. That's done with the broken mirrors in the C shape. They see the street is really well lit. And see the front of the building and how those slats corresponds to, continues the rhythm of the building, and how it avoids every single windows. So it doesn't disrupt the actual. So lighting is really powerful in transforming space. And this street became like a destination. People really wanted to see it. Another one is how you project shadows onto walls. And this is us like lighting the model and see the influence of colors and angles and shadows and everything. So basically, lighting transforms the space and it just creates another world. And it's not only in landscape and in urban design, not only about safety, it's about contrast. And if you make everything look the same, you lose focus and you don't have the same visibility. That's what I wanted to talk about today.
Awesome, that was great. We can have a brief little Q&A right now, and then we'll open up the Slido afterwards. So, does anyone have questions? Yes, right there.
I'm really interested in your color theory process in choosing the shades of and tones of lighting, and I liked hearing about how you got the white sheet and tested different lights on it, but how does that change with materials that are in the space?
Yeah, it changes with the material, and what happened is that I usually, like for me it's costumes, so I ask samples of costumes, and the bigger the sample, the easier it is, more work. And I go back to that laundry room, and if I use, for the David Bowie project, I asked for 2 days of color selection because we were using LEDs fixture, and I rented one of the same LEDs fixture, and I had a sample of all the costumes, and I created a color chart that if the costume is blue or red, if I use certain color, the red disappears or gets flat. So if I don't get those, I don't have time on stage to regulate that, especially those dancers keep moving. So that's how I do it, whether it's a sheet or costume samples. And if it's traditional, I have like 3 lights basically, that are like 250 watt, the lights that you light in your garage, or work lights. And I set them on my washing machine, on the dryer actually, and I have clips. And that gel book I have in a book form, 8.5 by 11. So it's big. I didn't bring it. It's too heavy. And so it's a binder, and I just clip it on. But there's hundreds and hundreds of colors. And sometimes it's basically, there's a big difference between this blue and this blue, although it doesn't look it. And you see it on the skin, you see it on the thing. And also you can create illusion. A cold color put together with another cold color, then that lighter cold color will look warmer. But if you use that even same cold water color that looked warmer with a warm color, then it looks cold. So there's also another layer of choices that the same color you can use. It can be cold in one scene and warm in the other scene, depending on how you combine them with the other. There's a lot to talk about color, so I could go on, but that's basically what I would do.
So I used to be a dance major, so I find this fascinating. So, have you heard of Laba notation?
Yes.
Okay, so for everyone that doesn't know, if you think of sheet music for like a piano piece, it's like that, but for a dance. So I was just wondering, like, do you often get those pieces of Laba notation to work with as you're playing?
No. No.
That's
Actually, there was one instance when many, many years ago, when I was stage manager at Le Grand Ballet in Montreal, we had what we call the Diaghilev project. And they remounted three pieces in the Diaghilev era using Laba notation. But it doesn't help the lighting. We have our own way of, I mean, I have a book upstairs where, like, it's my notebook from the ballet that I talked about, and that I use a slide for the lighting process, which, like, you have, and you can see the shaft of shadows and whatever I wanted to achieve, and then I just make squirrels. And also nowadays we have video recording. So we use video recording, and I just play and stop and look at the arrangement in the space and how long they take to go from one state to the other. And that helps me time my shift, my light shift, whether it's a color shift or all that. And also with the musical, you become musical.
So when it comes to like our urban spaces or even this room, for example, are there any significant like light engineering decisions that have to take place? Like as you talk about producing a story with the light that you use, is there any like significant thought that goes like this, like how to successfully light just basic urban spaces or our homes or?
I don't think there's rules. I think they're just you just respond to the environment you proposed, and you make your own stories. Yesterday we were talking about planting, and a theme fairy tale forest or enchanted forest. So you start playing in your head, like how would you light an enchanted forest, and so you start playing with like reflections, little twinkle lights. You start playing in your head like what triggers that feeling. So each space, here it's like it has to be a useful environment. I mean, you write notes, you need to see that you're writing the notes. But if it was like a concert, then I would change the lighting. But it depends. So it depends on the purpose of the thing. One thing, and also here it's an even lighting, so everybody is lit the same way. And also, I was mentioning fluorescent or the LEDs now in the tubes. It's probably tubes LEDs now. Is that as you write, there's no really shadow. But if it's a defined light, you'll start having shadows. And when you write, I have that problem when I light a pianist. So it's important for the pianist to see his keyboard. But I sometimes don't have the perfect position on top that wouldn't create a shadow line. Also, you have that lip here, and that lip obstructs half of the key. So suddenly the pianist, if I'm straight down, lose half of the black keys. So I have to go a little slight angle, but then it's the shadow of his head. So it's a combination of two things. So each object has its own constraints and limitation. And what is it used for? It's important for the pianist not only to see his music, but it's to see his keys and to see the full width of the keys. So that's just an example that comes along. So I wouldn't light this room differently because this is a classroom. But if it was to use, if I wanted to pay attention to the pianist, then, okay, then how do those lights fade? And if you start fading LEDs, you'll see that they start flickering, especially the cheap one. And it's very annoying for our eyes, as we know.
We're going to do one more question.
Devin?
Okay.
Todd, you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question was regarding the shaping of your light. In the one slide that you showed us, where it was the longer hallway with the projected information and the boat and the rock, you had like squiggling shapes going through there, and I'm just wondering, when it's not like a standard shape, like a circle or a square or something like that, where's your inspiration behind it? Is it dictated by like the equipment you're using, or is there a thought process that goes into that, and what does that look like?
Well, here it's like the river was there, so I had to light it as a river. And also they had already bought those instruments with the moving gobos, to the animation thing. But as sometimes if I want to create a certain path, it'll depend on if the story tells me something. In the ballet where I showed you, in the photos where I showed you those circles, there's a moment where that main dancer has a journey. And she goes from a corner of the stage and is attracted towards the center. And when I saw that in rehearsal, right away I said, she's following lights. And so I had that pool of light that was preceding her. So suddenly I gave a motivation, a different motivation. The choreographer didn't ask me that. But when I saw that, I said, it's going to work. And then as she reaches the center, she enters that light, and that light becomes bigger. So it's like a part of her that she's following, and that is bringing her. She says, come with me. And then once you get to that space, you'll understand. And she becomes into the light, and she becomes the light itself. So sometimes you just pay attention to your environment. I think that's what it is. Respond to your environment and pay attention. Look at how the light hits that tree. What does it make you feel? To me, it's about feeling. It's about sensing what's around you. And for me as well, it's like, how can I reproduce that? How can I get that colored sky? Oh my God. How can I get that sense of immense space and in a small space? 2 weeks ago, I was in Australia, and I had to remount a show that we did in a black box, but there we had to do it in a white box. I had never done a show in a white box. What does that mean? It's like you have no control on the lights. It just goes all over the place. But I transformed that space so much that at the end of the third performance, there was like a really important artist from Australia that came. She says, oh my God, what you did with that space, I had never seen that space lit that way. It just transformed it. It's all about transforming. And transforming either your perception, transforming the space, transforming the way you look at things. And all my life, I keep looking at things in a different way and I try to interpret, and how can I recreate, how can I make that happen? It's so magical. So that's why I still do it, even if I've done it for 40 years. Every day it's a different challenge, every day it's a different either story to tell, different limitation, but it's fun.
All right, let's give it up for Pierre Lavoie.